Hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us for this month's Solutions of Change monthly mental health moments. This month we're talking about stigma, specifically mental health stigma. In the introduction video, I stated that it's important for us to recognize that mental health stigma exists and how it impacts us. It's also important for us to recognize how we can fight back against stigma on a daily basis, and also that that is our individual responsibility when it comes to mental health stigma. So again, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. The objectives for this month's presentation include defining stigma related to mental illness and the impact it has on those suffering from mental illness. Identify statistical data pertaining to the prevalence of mental illness across the country, within the youth population, and across cultures. Describe the effects of stigma on the behavioral health system, highlight the effect of stigma on recovery, and instill tips on reducing stigma and fighting back against mental health stigma. So here's a riddle of sorts. What figment of the human imagination has the power to isolate individuals and families, encourage people to deny a fatal illness and ignore its symptoms, keep desperately ill people from seeking help, block funding for treatment for all but a small fraction of those who need it, and persuade society to choose far more expensive alternatives, including imprisonment, the human and financial costs of accidents and secondary illnesses, and the wholesale loss of human lives, productivity, and potential. If you haven't guessed it yet, the answer is stigma. These are the reasons why it's so important for us to have a conversation about stigma and the impact that it has on us as individuals, in our relationships, within our families, our communities, and society as a whole. These items on this list are all true about stigma. So take a second to think about what stigma is and how it's impacting you on a daily basis. In order to do that, we must ask the question, what is stigma? Stigma is the negative view associated with a specific circumstance, quality, or person. Stigma can create isolation, blame, and secrecy among those suffering from mental illness. It's important that we recognize that it's not just mental illness, but also mental health concerns. And mental health concerns are more like things that everyone deals with, particularly on a daily basis. So let's think about difficulty in communication and relationships and the impact that that has. Family trauma, our experiences, whether it's professionally, interpersonally, with our families. There are so many things that we as human beings go through on a daily basis, difficulties that we have in common. We want to make sure that we make the distinction between mental health concerns and mental illness. Mental illness is when you have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder or an illness. And so it's important to recognize that stigma has an impact on both of those groups of people, on all of us. Stigma is also what individuals with mental health illness face when they face rejection, bullying, and discrimination as a result of their mental health concerns or their mental health illness. And so it's very important that we recognize what stigma is in order to recognize what the impact is and how we can combat it. Now let's look at some statistics related to mental illness. In the United States, 43.8 million adults experience mental illness yearly. 1 in 5 experience mental illness. 1 in 25 experiences severe or serious mental illness. And half of all chronic mental illness begins prior to the age of 14. When we think about those numbers, that's a lot of us, right? And then to think that half of those begin prior to the age of 14. Prior to the age of 14, we think about all the things that we are learning, the transitions that are happening in our lives. And so to think that someone younger than the age of 14 is dealing with some type of chronic mental illness really makes us stop and think. This is an important subject. It's something that we really need to get a hold of so that we can impact the lives of those who are struggling on a daily basis. 1 in 5 children aged 13 to 18 have or will have a serious mental illness. And suicide is the third leading cause of death for individuals aged 10 to 24. 90% of those suicides are mental health related. And so when we think about suicide, we're not just thinking about the act. We're thinking about the thoughts that come before the act. In order for an individual to reach a space where they feel like the only option is to take their own life, where there is no hope, where they feel like tomorrow is not promised in a way that's positive or productive. We're thinking about the thoughts that lead up to that. Then 70% of youth in the juvenile justice system suffer from mental illness. And so when we think about the ideas that are associated with youth, right, the things that are happening on a daily basis, um, academic stress, emotional turmoil within our families, the thought and feeling of being misunderstood, the mistakes that we make in our youth, and to relate that to the population of the juvenile justice system at 70% dealing with some type of mental illness or mental health concern, it really is shocking. And so it's important that we recognize this so that we can offer hope to our youth in a way that allows them to make good decisions, but also to recognize that their mental health is important. Mental illness concerns span throughout all prominent cultures in the United States. And it's important for us to recognize that because it means that this is one of the things that we are all in together. It is important that we notice that mental health is important for every single one of us. And that means whether it is a difficulty in a relationship that's ended, or, strain in relationships in our families, or something societal. It's important that we understand that we all deserve attention when it comes to our mental health. And sometimes that's attention that we need to pay to ourselves. Members of the LGBTQ plus community are twice as likely to suffer from mental health concerns than their heterosexual counterparts. And so again, this is another demographic that sometimes gets lost in our communication and our thought processes when it comes to the importance of mental health concerns and mental illness. So take time to think about these groups of people, which we're all one of in some way or another, and how that impacts us on a daily basis, again, on a daily basis, and what the impact can be long term. So thinking about the statistics, the one thing that we can take away from it is that we all need to pay attention to what mental health looks like, how mental health concerns come about, and how to treat and recover from them. So let's talk a little bit about stigma in the behavioral health system. Stigma associated with labeling as mentally ill prevents individuals from seeking care. And this is more so about the idea, right? So when we think about stigma itself, it is an idea. It's not something tangible. It's something that we have allowed societally to label individuals to make us feel that if you are mentally ill or you have a mental health concern, that you're untouchable in a way. There's fear associated with that label. And so when we recognize that, we adjust the way that we talk about mental health concerns. It's a lot easier for an individual to get on board with the idea that they have a mental health concern that can be diagnosed and treated and then they can recover from than it is to label someone as mentally ill. And so it's important that in the behavioral health system, we start to adjust our terminology and the language that we use, but also when we're dealing with ourselves, adjusting the way that we are labeling ourselves. So when we talk about mental health concerns, it's easier to talk about it in a way that is specifically associated with mental wellness. And so when we start saying that I'm an individual with a mental health concern that impacts my ability to be mentally healthy, then we start to think about it a little bit differently. Because when we think about medical health concerns, we know that there are treatments, there are things that we can do. So when we become more associated with the idea that there is treatment and recovery, it's a lot easier to accept not even that label, but the idea of what it is to be mentally ill. There are two types of harm associated with stigma that include self-esteem and social opportunities. So again, we go back to the idea that it's not just about how we see ourselves in society or how society sees us, but more so about how we see ourselves. And so again, the impact on self-esteem is that we start to believe that there isn't a positive, productive person in ourselves. And so we start to allow that stigma to tell us that as an individual, we don't have the capability to be more mentally well. And then when it comes to social opportunities, we start to think that we can't be productive socially if we have a mental health concern, which is not true. And so calling out the falsehoods that are associated with mental health are very important when it comes to combating stigma. Other preventative implications are present as well. Many individuals are unsure of how or when to seek treatment within the behavioral health system. The time and energy associated with caring for mental health can be intimidating, and a lack of support system can prevent individuals from seeking and remaining consistent in treatment. And so now we've created more boundaries and more barriers to becoming more mentally healthy, because we have started to see that, oh, maybe I'm just having a little bit of a difficulty, or, I'm having difficulty on a daily basis. So being able to pinpoint how and when to seek treatment is important. And then also being able to say that self-care is important, right? Being able to say that caring for my not only medical well-being, but my mental well-being is important for me as an individual is also an important part of combating stigma. And when we look for support systems, now support systems can be one of many things. It can be based on our self-talk, the way that we support ourselves. It can also be support from someone that we're in a relationship with, or our family members. Our support system could be our therapist. It could also be a group of individuals who are dealing with or have dealt with mental health concerns that helps us see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So recognizing the issues that are associated with stigma in the behavioral health system also allow us to be more active and be more of advocates for ourselves and others when it comes to recognizing, treating, and being in recovery from mental health concerns. So the next portion is exploring stigma in recovery. Stigma is a barrier to functions that are important parts of recovery from a mental health concern. Those include social adaptation. Social adaptation facilitates an individual's view of themselves as a productive part of society. So this kind of expands on the idea that we mentioned in the previous section. When we don't see ourselves as a productive part of society, then it limits our ability to be functional when it comes to interactions with others outside of ourselves. Also interactions in a professional setting, and then interactions in our communities, which allow us to advocate for ourselves and others. Self-esteem, again, aids individuals in continuing practices that lead to recovery. So when we have self-esteem, it means that we are important to ourselves, right? It means that we have seen something in ourselves that is of value, and we hold that near to us, and it makes us, forces us into a space that allows us to continue practices that lead to recovery, because we want to be our best selves. We want those things that are important parts of us to be at the forefront of who we show up in the world as. And then self-reflection. Self-reflection gives insight to warning signs and triggers, and positively impacts the ability of an individual to manage their unique mental health concerns. So when we think about self-reflection, we're thinking about doing a kind of deep dive into ourselves in a way that says, how do I function normally? Or how do I want to function normally? What are the things that I'm good at? What are the things that I'd like to be better at? And so when we know ourselves in a way, it allows us to recognize those warning signs. Like, in the past month, I've slept a lot. I haven't felt like I wanted to interact with people, or I get really anxious when it's time for me to leave the house and, go to work, or whatever it is. We can recognize those things when we have a good sense of self. And that good sense of self comes specifically from self-reflection. So these are important parts of recovery, and stigma creates barriers to those, as we mentioned in the previous section. And so when we think about that as a whole, it's so important that, again, that we're recognizing these barriers to recovery that are initiated through stigma, and saying, okay, what can I do better when it comes to being more functional in social adaptation? What can I do better to bolster my self-esteem? And what processes are required for self-reflection? So to expand on those ideas, here are some important strategies for individuals recovering from mental health concerns and mental illness. The first is to assess yourself. Again, this is a part of that self-exploration. Explore how stigma may have influenced your personal attitudes, beliefs, and practices, specifically when it it comes to mental health concerns and mental illness. Stay focused, participate in dialogue with a trusted support system. The more we're having conversations about what mental health looks like and how mental health concerns and mental illness can impact mental health, the more it becomes normalized in a way that says it's okay to talk about this. Utilize emotional intelligence. If you weren't able to join us for last month's monthly mental health moments about emotional intelligence, the basis of it is that emotional intelligence means that we can recognize, control, and effectively express what our emotions are. And so when we're in that space of emotional intelligence, we're more open about the things that are going on with us. We're talking about what mental health really looks like and the process of being more mentally healthy. Be a witness. Tell stories of individual and family recovery. Offer hope. That just means that we're having open dialogue that says, it's okay. Like, I've seen someone deal with something similar. Maybe it's time that, you seek help, or this is how I sought help. Or, these are the things that help us find space for recovery, ongoing recovery. Model non-stigmatizing language. Use language that is medically descriptive rather than moralistic. Use person-first language, such as things like a person dealing with a mental health concern or a person who has been diagnosed with a mental illness, meaning that we are changing the labels so that we can see that it's not just about the condition, but it's more so about the person. Educate yourself. Seek educational opportunities to increase your knowledge about mental health, including practices, concerns, disorders, treatment, and recovery. The more we know about a specific topic, the more likely we are to engage in that practice that causes us to be more mentally healthy. And it also gives us more information to have more appropriate dialogue when we're talking about mental health and mental health concerns. Be an advocate. Speak out against stigma-related discrimination, and that can be found in housing, employment, government benefits, access to health and human services, and in stigma-shaped policies and procedures. When you recognize that there is something not quite right about the way that we are dealing with mental health, it's so important that we're having conversations, and whether that is on an individual level with friends and family members, or whether it's on a more political level that says, yes, we are here and our mental health is important. And that way we get things changed. We have people pay more attention to the impact that mental health has on people's functionality and the fact that we all need resources and assistance. So now that we've discussed that, let's discuss what stigma reduction looks like, ways that we can fight back against stigma. The first is change the way that we talk about mental health conditions. It's important to have that knowledge that allows us to talk accurately and effectively about what mental health conditions really are, how they impact people, and the way people can get treatment and recover from them. Challenge misconception in the moment. So if you hear someone say, oh, don't mind her, she's just crazy, or he's so bipolar, he acts this way one time and then the next time he acts this way. If you know better, do better. So when you hear people use that language, we challenge that misconception in the moment. We say, no, that's not the way that we talk about mental health. Like, she's not crazy. Maybe she's going through something. He's not bipolar. Maybe he's having a tough day, or maybe he is going through something. Start to see people and not their conditions. If you know someone has a mental health concern or a mental health diagnosis, then make sure that you are seeing the person before you see what their diagnosis is. Make sure that we recognize the humanity within us that says that is a person who is dealing with something that could be difficult. Maybe I could offer assistance, or maybe I could just treat them like a normal person and help them understand that it's okay for them to have a mental health concern. And then offer support. offering support is huge. And maybe we don't have the tools to offer support, like being able to sit down and talk with somebody and help them through their issue, but offering support in a way that says, hey, I see that you're having a hard time, and I looked up some resources, and maybe one of these things could be beneficial for you, or I'm a friend and I'm here for you if you need someone to talk to. Or in a family, being able to say, like, the issues that you guys have between each other is something that needs to get worked out, or something that you can work out. Showing people that there's a capability for things to get better is an important part of offering support. So these are just a few ways that we can fight back against stigma. But again, these things are on a daily basis. Being able to recognize that there are issues associated with the way that we think and how we see mental health and mental health concerns, and being able to adjust ourselves in a way that says, no, stigma kind of stops here because I said so. So thinking about ways to fight back against stigma takes an effort, and using those ways takes an effort. It's all for our collective gain. Think about it in that way. So now that we have an idea of what stigma is and the things that are associated with it when it comes to mental health and mental health concerns, the question we ask is, what's next? Explore how mental health stigma impacts you and those around you. Have meaningful conversations concerning mental health concerns and mental illness. Seek help. I cannot say enough how important it is to seek help. Help-seeking behaviors are one of the most important things that we can do to facilitate our individual mental health and the mental health for our families and people that we really care about. And then register for our Solutions of Change monthly mental health moments group forum at the end of the month. Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you for our group forum at the end of the month.